This next panel, or it's really two panels, I suppose, in some respects, is titled New and Evolving Agreements. It might also be called, I suppose, Let's Not Forget Mexico and the Native Americans. And I think it's fair to say that from our discussion this morning, we're doing a much better job with that than we've historically done. Certainly, the early agreements didn't pay a whole lot of attention to some of these issues, and I think that the people involved in the negotiations now are much more attuned to the concerns and the needs of both Mexico and Native American communities. And so there's overlap in that sense, that these are issues that haven't been addressed as well as they might have been historically. But we're going to sort of try to keep them somewhat separate here today. We have two people to talk about the agreements involving the Navajo Nation, and Tanya Trujillo is going to be first. She is the senior counsel to the Democratic majority for the Senate Subcommittee on Water and Power of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And assuming Katie shows up, Tanya will be followed by Katie Yellow Horse Gilbert. Katie's actually a math teacher at Kirtland Central High School in Kirtland, New Mexico, but she served as the Water Rights Commissioner for the Navajo Nation.
There she is.
And she's here. Good.
There she is.
Here she comes. Okay. So, and anyway, she's going to share her perspective of some of the negotiations involving the Mexico part of the agreement. I think Tanya's going to be telling us a little bit about the Arizona part of the agreement. Is that correct, Tanya?
Flip.
Oh, you're talking about New Mexico, and Katie's talking about Arizona. Okay, very good. Thank you. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Colorado. I very much appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be here at this conference. I've followed the conference in prior years and am happy to be amongst a lot of old friends here, and also happy to be representing Senator Bingaman, the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. But for the most part of my presentation, I will be presenting a background from the state of New Mexico's perspective, which was my former position as counsel to the state of New Mexico on interstate issues. Senator Bingaman's prior water lawyer moved on to be Commissioner of Reclamation, so I moved to DC to try to help fill those shoes, and appreciate the opportunities that have been out there as well. But it's great to be back west. And I, just as a disclaimer, do not intend to answer any questions about the prospects for any type of legislation moving forward in Congress this year. So. Either good or bad. So. But as has been mentioned a couple times already today and last night, that the tribal issues in the basin are very important, and in particular the resolution of Indian water rights claims is something that affects not only the tribal interests in the basin, but also the non-Indian interests, and is a very important subject, and could actually be a topic of its own at CLE conferences. The resolution involves a very long process and sometimes decades of negotiation to get the terms put together and get the agreements moved through Congress, and then once they're through Congress, the implementation phase takes a long time as well. So there you have to have a long-term view when dealing with Indian water rights issues. As Commissioner Connor recognized this morning, the administration has had several successes with respect to settlements involving this basin, and has, just jumping through a few of them, Animas La Plata was actually completed recently, and my understanding that the reservoir is almost full now. In Arizona, they are moving forward with negotiations on Navajo, and I think Katie will provide some more information on that. But last year, we were successful in enacting the White Mountain Apache settlement together with 2 New Mexico Indian water rights settlements and a Montana Indian water rights settlement. And in 2009, we approved the Navajo, New Mexico settlement agreement, which will be the focus of my presentation today. There are also negotiations pending in Utah. The Navajo Nation in part covers some of Utah, so that's another area where discussions are underway. All of the settlements involve similar challenges. One of the challenges is getting water to communities who desperately need water, also resolving long-standing claims and resolving litigation, and one of the focuses is also to make sure the settlements fit within the state's water rights apportionments. And that's what I'm going to focus on, is what we did from a New Mexico perspective in terms of making the Navajo-New Mexico settlement work in the context of the Upper Colorado Compact and the Colorado River Compact. The map of the basin here indicates that the state of New Mexico, and you can't see it too clearly, but the state of New Mexico actually has upper basin and lower basin components, and it's located in the upper basin and the lower basin, and has a small lower basin apportionment through Arizona v. California, which is fully allocated to existing uses in New Mexico. The New Mexico also has an allocation under the Upper Basin Compact of 11.25% of the consumptive use that is available to the Upper Basin states under that compact. The Navajos had a, switch. So this is a map of the Navajo Nation and shows that the Navajo Nation represents a huge portion of the Upper Basin territory in New Mexico. The Navajos had a very large claim for water rights in that basin. So again, one of the goals of the settlement was to make sure the settlement would fit within New Mexico's apportionment of compact water. And again, we also had a goal of providing water to the Navajo Nation. And as you have heard in prior presentations, that's a community that is desperately in need of water. Many of the residents haul water and do not have basic drinking water, something that we enjoy as a matter of course. So the goal of the settlement is to provide that basic drinking water to those members of our state. But the settlement involved challenges from a compact perspective because of the fact that the area involves upper basin and lower basin components, and the compact apportions water to the upper basin or the lower basin. The upper basin compact doesn't specify that a state can use its apportionment in the upper basin and the lower basin. It says you can use your apportionment elsewhere in your state, but again, doesn't specify you can use it in the upper basin and the lower basin. So that was the challenge that we were facing, is how to make sure we could get water from the upper basin to meet water supply needs in the upper basin, but also to meet water supply needs in the lower basin where some of the major communities exist. We knew we were going to have to think creatively and also get cooperation from the other states in this matter. And one of the first things New Mexico did was look to prior congressional authorization as a means of going forward. Going back to 1968, Congress had authorized a power plant to be constructed as a component of the Central Arizona Project, and specified that if the power plant were constructed in the lower basin, it could be supplied with water from Arizona's upper basin supply if that water was accounted for as an upper basin use. And so based on that, I hesitate to use the word precedent, but based on that prior congressional action, New Mexico went forward into discussions with the other upper basin states to try to get a similar provision agreed to for New Mexico's uses on the Navajo in the Navajo settlement. And in 2003, New Mexico was successful in obtaining a resolution from the Upper Colorado River Commission to authorize New Mexico to use its upper basin apportionment in the upper basin and the lower basin in New Mexico in connection with the Navajo settlement. And just to read an excerpt from that commission report or resolution, it was in the spirit of comedy and without prejudice to the position of any state regarding unresolved issues, that the state's support and to the extent necessary consent to the Navajo Gallup water supply project in New Mexico. And at that 2003 meeting, there was also a resolution adopted in connection with Utah's Lake Powell pipeline project, which also contemplated the use of Utah's upper basin water in the lower basin in Utah. So moving forward with respect to the Navajo agreement, New Mexico and the Navajo Nation continued their negotiations, and in 2005 entered into a settlement agreement. Unfortunately, the United States was not engaged to a large extent in those negotiations, but the state and the Navajo Nation went forward with an agreement and recognized that one of the next steps was congressional authorization. In addition, I'll go to a map of the Navajo Gallup supply project. A prior congressional act in 1962, which authorized the Navajo Indian Irrigation Project and the San Juan Chama project in New Mexico, had a provision requiring that congressional approval was required of any new contract of water from this basin. It also required the Secretary of Interior to issue a hydrologic determination to assure that a sufficient supply of water was reasonably available for this new contract, for this new project. So the New Mexico knew that it needed to consult with the other upper basin states and with the United States to complete this new hydrologic determination. And in 2006, the Bureau issued a draft. There's Dave up there, thanks. And in 2006, again, New Mexico went to the Upper Colorado River Commission and sought a resolution of support for this new hydrologic determination, which was a requirement of moving the settlement forward. New Mexico was successful in negotiating with the other upper basin states and obtained a resolution in 2006 of approval of the settlement agreement, approval of the Navajo Gallup water supply project, approval of the proposed settlement contract for the water uses, and the Upper Colorado River Commission supported a determination by the Secretary of the Interior that sufficient water was reasonably likely to be available for the contract. Both of the Commission's resolutions contained caveats that the states were not giving up rights, that the states supported some of the more traditional nitpicking or some of those sore issues that Pat was talking about this morning. So, those issues weren't put aside, but notwithstanding those difficult issues, the states were able to come together and work together and support this particular, hydrologic determination and project. I think it's significant that this resolution was being negotiated and was put together at the same time that the 7 basin states negotiations on shortages were occurring. So there was a general spirit of cooperation, and in conflict resolution that existed at the time. That 7 basin states agreement, as you know, was executed in December of 2007, and that provided the framework, I think, or the 7 states agreement was a framework for an additional agreement in the Navajo settlement context amongst the 7 basin states to support the Navajo settlement legislation that was required in connection with the settlement. Again, as I mentioned, the settlement involves issues of upper basin use of water in the lower basin in New Mexico. And also, as you can see, the Navajo Nation is very much a part of Arizona. And in connection with the Navajo Supply Project, Navajo Gallup Project, it made sense to think about the possibility of delivering water through New Mexico's system for use in the Navajo capital of Window Rock in Arizona. And so in connection with the New Mexico settlement, that was contemplated as a possible issue if there was a settlement in Arizona and if that issue were resolved in that context. So the 7 basin states cooperated and reached an agreement that was finalized in August of 2008 through a letter signed by the same signatories to the 2007 agreement that was sent to Senator Bingham and Senator Domenici on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, outlining specific provisions that the states thought would be important to include in the congressional authorization for the project. They were explicit in recognizing New Mexico's use of upper basin water in the lower basin in New Mexico for the Navajo settlement. And they also addressed the potential uses in Arizona should a settlement be finalized in Arizona. Again, the letter had the usual caveats of being non-precedential in nature and highlighted specific provisions that were eventually incorporated into the settlement legislation. And I just wanted to highlight a few of them because I think they represent interesting agreements in the context of congressional action. And I know Pat has raised the prospects of congressional action and not looking forward to future congressional action. But this was an example of successful congressional action. Again, just want to point out Mike Connor's very important role in getting all of that done, and I think he gets a lot of the credit for that. But just to highlight some of the provisions that the states requested to be included were specific upper basin protection provisions, a specific reference in the legislation to no precedent, identification of this project as being a unique situation, which was to benefit an Indian tribe, identification of the fact that the Navajo Nation was located in both the upper basin and the lower basin. It was intended to address critical Indian water needs in the state of Arizona and the state of New Mexico. The legislation points out the fact that the Navajo Nation's capital city is in Window Rock, which is very close to the border of New Mexico. It identifies the lack of any other reasonable options available for water supply in that area. And it identifies the consensus of the basin states regarding the diversions authorized under the project. So those were the conditions that the basin states had agreed to and submitted to Congress for consideration for inclusion in the legislation. Shortly after the letter was submitted, the bill was reported out of committee, and approximately a year later, the bill was passed and was signed by the President as part of the Omnibus Public Lands Act of 2009. That's also the same bill that includes the Secure Water Act that was referenced earlier today. So the legislation has specific language that authorizes water to be diverted in the upper basin in New Mexico for use in the upper basin and the lower basin in New Mexico, and could possibly provide precedent for other agreements down the road. I did want to note that the disclaimer associated with the basin study does not include this legislation in its list of the law of the river, and perhaps it should be included as an additional item that's in part of that list. But in connection with the Navajo settlement in New Mexico, the next step is to begin construction on the project. Go back to that map. It's my understanding that the construction may be slated to begin as early as September of this year. The Bureau of Reclamation is doing a great job as far as getting that off the ground. The drought still exists in New Mexico, notwithstanding the great water year that everyone else is having. The Navajo community are still hauling water in the Navajo Nation. So we hope that progress will move forward as quickly as possible. I want to thank again, on behalf of New Mexico, the cooperation of the basin states and the U.S. for allowing us to move forward with this important project. I don't know what the next steps are for the Navajo agreement in Arizona. I don't know what the next steps are for the Utah Lake Powell pipeline. What we have heard is that there is an era of cooperation amongst the states, so hopefully that will be the backdrop for the other negotiations that are ongoing. I would point out that there is also a connection to the U.S.-Mexico discussions, and just anecdotally have a memory of having finalized the letter of the 7 basin states for the Navajo project. I think on the day of one of the U.S.-Mexico meetings, which was down in El Paso. Unfortunately, less than a month after that, the commissioners were killed in the plane crash that happened shortly after that, and it was, a tragedy for everyone in the basin on that front. But all of these issues were very interrelated, and the negotiations that were happening in one context were able to spread and help develop the agreements that were needed in other contexts as well. So I think Katie's going to fill in gaps with respect to the Navajo agreement, and thanks again for having me here.
Oh, you took off the reservation. I'm going to borrow Tamara's map here. That's fine. Okay, Yate She Katie Gilbert and Chef. The Bethlehem Shlido Kiani Bashishchi. I think probably the word in the literature tells you that we're losing our language. Not a lot of people know their language anymore, but in Heya, my generation, on the Nebek in Hizad by Yadelke, Toba in the Ado, Toba Yadelke, Twitch Epada Hika. And what that says is we're still water planners. I just said we're plan for water. We have water needs in the future, now and in the future, and we have water litigation and whatnot. I just want to tell you. I want to tell you that I'm not an attorney, and I've never played one. So I just want to let you know that this is a Diné personal perspective of water rights, water settlements, water litigation. I am a high school math teacher, so I'll teach you a little bit about calculus too. What's calculus? So if none of my water rights information makes sense, you'll know what calculus is. What's calculus? Calculus is finding the volumes of exotic shapes and also finding rates of change. That's calculus. So I'm a high school math teacher. That's been my career. And I supplement my math teaching with water education. We have the San Juan River. I don't know if you'll see it on there, but the high school that I teach at is majority Navajo, Kirtland Central High School in the Four Corners area. And we have the San Juan River running like within walking distance from our high school. And so I get my students out and we do water testing, river water testing, looking at the water quality. We test 9 different parameters. With my students, we look at dissolved oxygen, we look at temperature, phosphates, nitrates, with, no, not with the fancy state-of-the-art $2,000 water probes, but with some equipment that we buy from reasonably from Hawk. I think Hawk is like a supplier of water quality equipment, EPA approved. So I take my students out and we test river water quality, but just to build awareness among my students, because my students, you know, not a lot of them get to the river anymore. Not a lot of them get a chance to be outdoors because they've moved to the urban area and all they have is a little backyard. And even the non-Indian students there that I teach, you know, they have agricultural, a little bit of farming. Families do farming along the river. And I hear from my non-Indian students that they, you know, I've never been to the river. I got to go to the river now because the river runs right there within their community. So that's how I took an interest in water rights litigation and just kind of in a larger picture from my water quality experience. So in 2004, I was actually appointed by my tribe to serve as water rights commissioner because it was a fairly new commission. There was just a little bit of, I guess people sensed that there was not the communication between the different branches, the Department of Justice, Water Litigation Rights Unit, and also the Legislative Council, Executive Branch. The communication wasn't all that great. Just like, I guess you might look at and if I offend anybody, I really apologize. Just like maybe communication isn't that great with the lower Colorado River Basin. I know very well the upper Colorado River Basin states, you know, there's a little bit of a cooperative, you know, strand that runs through the states, and so there's a lot of cooperation too. From what I understand, remember that I read literature that folks, attorneys, other people write. So that's my perspective. That's what I see. So, so there wasn't that. I guess there was just a sense among the community, water users, the Diné communities, that communication was all that great. So, to put together a water rights commission, just kind of to oversee, evaluate, make some of the recommendations with the water rights attorneys, geologists, water resource folks, right? They do a lot of work. I credit, you know, the technical aspects of the water settlement to these folks. So that's how the Water Rights Commission of the tribe was created just recently. So I think probably like within its second phase is when I got into the picture and really opened my eyes to Western water law and tribal sovereignty and agreements, cooperations, and whatnot. And I know that in the literature, I realized that when I read literature, it's like, I don't know what it is about that Indian tribes have legal, significant claims to water, you know? It just seems like it just, you know, puts everybody on edge. Yes, we might by the fact that we have inherent rights, you know, historic rights, but we're still hauling water. You know, where is our significant legal claims to water, you know? My parents haul water. So basically my comments are not so much very technical and, you know, all the legal provisions of the water rights settlement that Tamara here spoke about. It's pretty much more for like demonstrating or giving you guys a snapshot of the livelihood of Diné water users in the rural communities. That's what I'd like to do a little bit more than, you know, paying attention to the provisions. Like I said, I feel like, personally, I feel like we're still Indian tribes. This is what I see. We're still coming out of that American Indian policy where, you know, there's, I guess it can be kind of divided into 5 different periods. We had the relocation period where Indian tribes were removed from not their reservations, but their homelands to reservations, right? That was just not, I listened to a lot of old history tapes from earlier. Listened to my grandmas talk about things like, well, you know, when the Diné people, Navajos, were relocated, we had a lot of children that came home without parents, without families, without clans, because, you know, that's how we identify ourselves, is by our clan. I am Black Sheep clan and Tarrowing House clan. But so she talks about this 90-year-old woman. These tapes were made in 1960, and she talks about all the little children, young children that came home without families. So that's not so, you know, that's pretty recent. And then after that, there was so we were, in that period, the treaties were signed, established reservations. After that, right after we were put on reservations, and then there was the assimilation allotment period, where the treaties that were established, or the reservations that were established for our use and occupancy, were divvied up. Were allotted to non-Indians, were allotted to Indians. Like my grandpa. My grandpa was allotted lands. I'm still trying to figure out if it was my grandpa, Joe Yellowhorse, who was given 160 acres, which none of my immediate family live on and or use or have title to, right? We just found out about it out of the blue like 3 years ago. My father got a letter from probate court that they were settling the estates of Joe Yellowhorse in the mail. And we figured really fast that the companies that developed these lands, or at least these lands to develop, they have more information about those allotted lands that were allotted to Indians than we do. We're still in the process digging through BIA records, Bureau of Indian Affairs records, right? So that's the assimilation allotment period. And then we have the reform period where things were just, you know, people kind of, federal government, states kind of left us alone for a little bit. So there was a little bit of, you know, I guess maybe a little bit more colorful period. And then the termination period, 1950s, when my mother and father looked at this work relocation program to get Indian people off the reservation and, you know, find them work. So that was my parents. My parents moved from the Window Rock area. She was talking about Window Rock, the capital. I grew up really near there, probably like half an hour from there. But my parents took advantage of that, looked at it as opportunity, even though it was like a termination policy. They relocated to California, found work. That's where they began their family. So there's that termination period. And then the modern era right now, you know? So when you, I guess just in friendly tone, when people, you know, when water planners, water litigants, lawyers, attorneys, the federal folks that, you know, appropriate monies, and congressional representatives, politicians that vote on these settlements, you know, there just seems like this phrase, they have significant water claims, you know. We're still hauling water. We're still getting over that period where we're not contending with those policies, but we're aware of it. And we're finding, like I said, I'm digging through BIA records to find exactly where my grandpa had lands allotted to him. So in that sense, you know, I don't think that we're like right at your front door taking your water. And that seems to be what I've gathered from just the layman's point of view. But so to the settlement here, the water, I was really involved in all the discussions for the Navajo Nation, New Mexico, San Juan River settlement. And I really sensed like a friendly tone, a positive tone. There are folks, intellectual folks, rational people, rational folks that see, have a sense of the water users in rural communities. They need water. They need water for their needs. They need water, allocated a portion of water. Yes, we might have significant inherent, as a sovereign nation or as a sovereign dependent nation, we need water. We need water for development. We don't have any, I can safely say that there's no water parks in my neighborhood. There's not a power plant water guzzler in my neighborhood. We just basically need water for domestic needs, our daily, everyday use. I'm probably going to go home this weekend. I live in the Four Corners area. Yeah, I'm a slave to my mortgage in the Four Corners area, but I go home to near the Capitol in Window Rock, help my father haul water. Okay, so 2 minutes. So I just wanted to just share that, the livelihood of, where my people are, as far as water development, water planning, right? But I was really pleased. I really have to give credit to our water rights litigation unit in our Department of Justice, Stanley Pollock, for the work that he does, for advocating for the Navajo people and their water rights. The guy sleeps with the books, and I don't see a lot of my colleagues and a lot of my Diné friends doing the same thing. So I really have to give credit to folks like Tamara, Mr. Connor. It was just recently, a couple years ago, that he just kept giving us this black scenario. Congress, Bush is going to veto the settlement. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. That's what. But I know that folks like Mr. Connor here, BOR, working with Domenici. Was it Domenici? Am I wrong? Sorry.
Bingaman.
Bingaman, that's exactly, okay, I got it wrong. Sorry. Don't need to quote it. But he was describing the political football of the administration, But things are turning out positively. Things are the outcome. With New Mexico, for our rights claims to the San Juan River in New Mexico. Now, Arizona is a different story. Time out. It's probably a good thing. And I know I saw some Arizona folks in here, and we don't get the same sense from Arizona. In fact, we just had, really quickly, 30 seconds, we have provisions for a water settlement for the western portion of the Navajo Nation with Arizona, right? Still a lower basin water, water from the lower basin, Colorado River. I think that our settlement was just, like I said, I don't want to create an even tougher scenario for our water rights litigation unit, because they just are at this every day 24/7 advocating. And I've seen our water rights attorneys go up against an army of attorneys for other water users, looking out for other water users. But I don't want to create a tougher scenario, but I just know that our Arizona water settlement, I don't speak about it as favorably as I do for our water rights settlement that we got with the state of New Mexico. And I just also want to say there's a couple folks from the Upper Colorado River Commission that I see kind of in the audience. So I remember going to one of their commission meetings, and it was kind of a, maybe behind the scenes in a different picture, but I just saw like an open, receptive type of environment. So, yeah, I better stop. I can't say any more about Arizona.
We did get a bit of a late start here, so if there's interest in a short question or two, maybe we can do that, and then we'll turn to the second part of the panel. Anyone? I guess I have one quick question that maybe Tanya can answer, maybe Katie, I don't know. I'm just curious about the priority of the Navajo water right. So you have a settlement with New Mexico. New Mexico has 11.25% of the upper basin share, which is not a fixed amount of water. Is there any, depending on what kind of priority the Navajo Nation has, is there any worry that in any given year they might not get their water?
Well, that's tied to the issue of the contract and the
Right.
importance of having a very good hydrologic determination that opines on the reasonable likelihood of availability of that supply. So the settlement is very much tied to that contract priority.
But it doesn't have a priority date as of the founding or the setting aside of the Navajo reservation, I'm guessing.
It's that was an issue that was negotiated, but it is more junior than that, and it's tied to the project supply associated with Navajo Reservoir.
Okay, good, thanks.
And it's a complicated. There are different priorities associated with different kinds of water, but.
Okay. Anything else? Any other burning questions? Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on to our second part of the panel here, which deals more with the Mexican-U.S. Negotiations. Here's what we're going to do with this part of the panel. Mario Lopez Perez will begin the discussion with a brief description of the history and the current status of the negotiations between the United States and Mexico. And he's also going to talk some about the issues relating to the environmental side of the equation, what's going on in the Delta and the like. Mario, as many of you know, he's been referred to many times already in this conference. He's Technical Standards Manager for the National Water Commission, and really the guy who's responsible for the water border issues with the United States and Mexico. It's really his job to deal with all those issues, and by all accounts, he's been doing a fabulous job with that. Mario, you want to come on up and get started? And then after Mario, we're going to have two different perspectives. We'll start with Steve Fitton, and Steve is going to sort of share the U.S. perspective on these things. He's Chief Counsel of the International Boundary and Water Commission. And then Jennifer Gimbel, who you've already met today. Jennifer, of course, is the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and she's going to offer a state perspective. Make sure I say A, I guess.
Oh, this one.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is the second time I have the privilege to talk to many people here in the University of Colorado. Last year I was invited by some good friends to have a speech in a private meeting, you might say so. And after that I went to the upstate school here very near in Fort Collins to have also a speech regarding the same issues of the Colorado River and the U.S.-Mexican negotiation. So at that time when I was here, I had also the privilege to talk to David Getches, to Mark, and to Brad Udall, and many other professors here at the university. And once I came back to Mexico and I talked to my bosses and some of my friends that I was here, and the persons who I talked to, they were really impressed. I had the opportunity to talk to them. Yes. Well then, you have seen this slide many times. But I want to stress Mexico's figures in order that you can comprehend and understand the way Mexico is feeling the process. And I stress the word feel the process because it is a different sense that believe the US people is working with us does have, and it is beginning to understand the way we are looking at things. Mexico is only 0% of the water storage in the basin. 0%. There's no storage, no dam in Mexico. There's no possibility to store water yet. We are only 10% of the overall irrigation areas of the basin. 10%. We are about 6 million people in the northern part of Mexico that receives the water and takes advantage and benefits from the Colorado River. 6 million people. We expect that this number will increase up to 10 million people by 2025. Why? Because the northern part of my country has the greatest growth percentage of the country. Why? Many people come here to the US looking for the American dream. And since they get not the possibility to go into the US, they stay at the Mexican border. Many of them work in the US and live in Mexico, in Tijuana, in Nogales, and many other cities. Some of them keep on with the idea to going up here to the US. This is the framework, and I stress this. This is the framework that Mexico does not want to change. It is not the interest of Mexico changing the 1944 treaty. Everybody know, it's been talked many times, the basin is over-allocated. We are part of this over-allocation. We understand that. And since Mexico relies on the US ability to store and to manage the water, it is important for us to get an agreement with the US. We are growing. The economy of the northern part of Mexico is still growing. Many of the products that are being grown in Mexican crops in this area with Colorado water comes to the US. It goes to Arizona, it goes to California, and even north. This is the framework. This is the framework we don't want to change, but the framework that we want to take advantage of. In the upper part, it says the allocation in million cubic meters per year. The second part says about an extraordinary drought as a condition not to receive the allocation that Mexico is entitled to. And the third part is the upper limit for Mexico's amount of water to receive. Can you imagine a country, a state, that has a limit in its water rights? It's the same thing as the compact. There's a limit amount of water that we receive regarding this 1944 treaty. And as we keep on growing. We want to keep on growing. So, what's the idea? Yesterday, Pat gave an excellent presentation, gave some excellent ideas that Mexico shares completely with her. Flexibility and predictability are those words we want to stress and we want to put inside this framework that we won't change. Mexico is not concerned regarding if the US wants to change the Colorado River Compact of the law, of the Colorado law, of the river of the law. The suggestion of Mexico is to stick to the present legal framework and to work inside, look for windows of opportunity, not to use the same words that are being written in the treaty, use other words to give opportunity to develop projects. It's been said, an 11-year drought. It's been said that the drought disappeared. It didn't disappear from Mexico. Why? Because the water that has been melting and running down south and fooling Glen Canyon and fooling Lake Mead is the reserve water for the future. Yesterday and in the morning we heard about climate change. It is important to stress that today, this year, we will use water that will be useful for everybody in the near future. And if we're not prepared for that, and if we don't understand the situation, we are not living the reality. So that's another point of why Mexico wants to get an agreement with the US. We need to be prepared. These are the deliveries of Mexico. You may see the decrease in the last years. Why? Because of the drought. And if you remember that Mexico relies on the ability of the use to store and to manage the water from the US. Can you imagine if the Colorado River ended at the border, at the northern border with Mexico, that Mexico didn't exist? What would you do if you hadn't had the amount of money, the amount of water that Mexico has? What would you do? You would find ways inside your legal framework to get water, to share water, to cooperate with each other, to be partners. That's Mexico's idea. To be seen as a partner, not as a competitor, not as a neighbor, just as a partner in the same basin. These are the principal uses in Mexico. Colorado River water uses. Agriculture. As I said, most of the crops grown in Mexico are export crops. They are not grown for Mexico's people. So you might say, if you use the term virtual water, Mexico receives an allocation and returns the product to the US where water is inside of it. Water supply, it's not much in general terms. In legal terms, the whole Mexico's allocation is property of the farmers in Mexico. In reality, some part of the water is being used for industrial uses and for water supply. Cities like Ensenada, Tijuana, Tecate, Mexicali use Colorado River water. What's the date? The update situation of the negotiations. The US cooperation actions, we agreed with the US some objectives. You can compare the objectives of the US people with Mexico's objectives. You will find a slight difference, a very slight difference. The difference is the importance for Mexico of the use of water for the environment. That's a slight difference. The other objectives are more or less the same. We want to cooperate, we want to collaborate, we want to share water, we want to be more efficient, we want to be prepared for climate change. We want to invest together to develop those projects. They are the same things. We share the same vision for the basin. That's not the point. The way we can handle it within the framework of the treaty is the challenge. These are some of the projects identified during the negotiations. Some of the projects that we share in terms not only in budget, we share in vision. And it is important for you to see this one, environmental restoration projects. It is main interest of Mexico to put this on the table. Why? Because in Mexico we have natural protected areas. Yes. But in the US, If you in the US devote an amount of water for the environment, the water quality that comes back down to Mexico will improve. Remember, we have salinity problems, and the environment will help to reduce the effect of the salinity. So it is a double purpose. In first instance, we have 4 groups. Last week in Tijuana, we included 2 more groups. New Water Sources Group. We fully agree with the US, with the 7 states, with the augmentation study. It is important to look for more water sources. So we are identifying and working in the direction of a desal plant in Rosarito Beach. We're conserving water. That's another project. We want to develop together a storage inside Mexico's irrigation area to control more the water and to be more efficient. The environmental, we have identified 5 priority environmental areas. It is very important for us to have success projects. Success projects that will help us to convince other people who doesn't believe we can work together, who doesn't want that we can share the natural resource that it is the water. And we want to operate the system in a different way. Minute 318 is just an example. It is not the goal of Mexico to stick on minute 318. It is just an example that we want to expand in a more broader agreement. The desal plant, it's been said today, it's been funded by 3 parties here in the US. We want to share that. Mexico this year is funding the 2nd phase of the project. This gives you the idea of the interest of Mexico to develop this. Some people said, US wants an desal plant in Mexico because they don't want to comply with environmental limits and permits where they do have it. In California, where they are more strict. So it is important for the US to have a desal plant in Mexico, and that Mexico copes with the bad stuff of the desalination. That's not true. That's not true. The idea is to have the same standard, environmental standards, if it were built in the US or if it were built in Mexico. The difference is it is more quick in Mexico to develop the project than it is in the United States. That's the difference. These are the conclusion of the first stage of the project. The project is possible to be developed. It is feasible. Next steps, as I said, we are funding the 2nd phase. And we want to have these projects funded very near. The conservation group is developing the Alamo Reforma storage tank inside the irrigation district 14, Mexicali Valley, that was hurt by the earthquake. It will conserve water, and the water will be used for 3 purposes: to improve quality, to regulate the deliveries to the Mexican farmers, and to deliver water for the environment. We have many wetlands, we have many projects that we want to conserve and to increase. This time will help us to do that. We have the project. CONAGUA is funding and working in terms of reference for the executive project and the final design. This is one example of the environmental group sites and development. Potential sites, this is the criteria, the considerations that we're taking. These are the locations of the environmental projects. They're along the border in the first instance, just to show people in the US and people in Mexico that we can handle together a binational restoration project, and that it is possible, and it is a success project. Next steps, the funding. Mexico is funding, and it is investing. We want to share this with the US. The operation, the conveyance through the American Canal, to deliver water to Mexicali as a help if another earthquake hits back Mexico, which we believe it will hit. It's a backup. The aquifer monitoring, the Colorado River modeling are some examples that we are developing together with the US. Next steps, working in many different areas. It is the commitment of Mexico to do that. What are the challenges that we see? In Mexico, as it may be in the US, the inefficiency in the agriculture and the usage of water, it's great. There we have a new water, if we do it right. Climate change is an issue that it is very concerning for Mexico. The development of new water sources without affecting the environment, without affecting or having an impact in the society. In Mexico, it is one of our main concerns and challenges. And also, we want to share this with you. We need to be open-minded in basin water management. Not to think as the 7 states and Mexico, or the upper Colorado, the lower Colorado and Mexico. It is the same basin. We need to think with an open mind to share water, share the problems, share the solutions. Within the framework of the compact, within the framework of the World Water, of the treaty, 1944 treaty. And also in Mexico, we are convinced that changing people's water culture and education, putting in their minds that water scarcity will be the normal situation. And we will not have much water in the near future. And also, the water from the environment, it is important for us as a great goal. These are some ideas to cope with these challenges. Use of the US storage to flexibilize operation and prepare for shorter conditions. Generate new sources, increasing the water supply and reducing the stress of the system. Explore US investments in exchange of water for a temporal use that benefits both countries. Use part of US and Mexico's water for environmental purposes. Final message. These are the priorities of Mexico. Mexico is committed to cooperate with the US to strengthen policies for sustainable water management as a basin, not as Mexico and the 7 states, to develop common opportunities and initiatives on priority water issues, the projects that will help us to convince people that it is possible. Share water, surplus, and shortage conditions. We are convinced that if we only want to share the surplus and we don't share the shortage conditions, we are not having the picture right. Both are Mexico's commitment. Not one, both. And also, since we are very involved in the world promoting adaptation of climate change in the water sector, we want to use this process. We want to use the results of this process to show the world that it is a good practice example in terms of integrated water management at the basin level within a basic climate change scenario. We have done so. I've been in Geneva in April, and I showed what we have been doing in the Colorado regarding this. They were really impressed. I presented in front of 2,000 people from different countries. I showed Colorado River example. They asked me many questions. And I said to them, the process is not finished. It is an ongoing process. And it doesn't finish this year, next year. It is a permanent process. We want to do that. And we will keep on working on that direction. Thank you very much.
This one right here? Yeah. There should be a clicker here. You can just push that.
Good afternoon. Could everybody stand up for a second and stretch? Get some of that food moving.
It helps.
Forward and back on the sides. There's a pointer.
Okay, thank you. All right. How does it feel? Thank you. Thank you. I heard the comment this morning about, you can't handle the truth. That came from A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson. Same actor, different movie, Batman. And he says, where do they get those marvelous toys? I came to the campus and looked around, buildings, and I said, okay, nature calls, go to the bathroom. Conservation and ecology at its finest, man. A two-step toilet. Here we are in law school, okay, legalese. Bifurcated biosolids disposal. Lord have mercy. Down when you do number 2, and it's got a big number 2, so you can't miss it. 1 up for number 1. Gentlemen, remember the lid. Aim carefully. The International Boundary and Water Commission. This is our forward. Yeah, okay, we're going forward in time. What we do, we deal with treaty issues. It started out initially just, okay, here's the boundary, and we'll deal with treaty issues as it developed, and then later it dealt with the rivers and the streams that flowed along the boundary, and then conservation. Then we went into the 1944 water treaty, which dealt with sanitation. And that was something, we got our first sanitation plant there in Nogales, and that started back in the 30s with a lot of help from the WPA, Works Progress Administration, and that was built. And then we got into energy, with the dams, to say we can generate electricity. And I think down the line, when we start looking at our sanitation plants differently, we can say, well, okay, yeah, that's sanitation. It could be fertilizer. It can be a source of water as well. A lot of things. This is not a before and after picture of me with a mustache. Of course, it helps to look like your boss. It helped me get a job. And you can always tell the International Boundary Water Commission, IBWC, you can always tell the IBWC commissioners from the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner, Mr. Connor, Dr. Connor, because of hair. I mean, he has nice hair. I got, and Ms. Gimble said, you look familiar. I said, okay. Everywhere I go, whatever country, everybody knows Mr. Clean. No, this is true. This is the truth. I was in the Philippines years ago. I was stationed at Clark Air Base, so went back. It's all open now, and returned to base after the eruption of Mount Pinatubo. So I went to one of the old grocery stores, and I'm shopping, and I needed some detergent. They sell detergent. You get powder, and they got liquid, and then they got the bar. It's a long bar, looked like a big candy bar, like a Kit Kat, but it's about that long. And I picked it up, my favorite brand, Mr. Clean, and his kid's in the aisle. He said, hey, look, Mr. Clean, Mommy. I said, okay. I said, how do you know me? That's in English, So we talked briefly about the treaties and how this thing got started, but about 2 months ago, the issue came up about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, because for years we had rafts going up and down the rivers, and nobody said anything. And now with 9/11 and Homeland Security, all of a sudden the White River rafters and the boats go down and they pull over to one side and end up in Mexico or go to the U.S., as you go downstream. And it was a security issue. And I said, listen, if you go back to the treaties as they were written, the river really just divided the countries, I guess, in terms of territory and for customs purposes. It wasn't intended to regulate commerce. And if, I went back and read the language, and it talked about being able to pull your boat off and tie up for the night or crisscross as long as you weren't bringing goods and trying to duck customs, it was okay. You could go to the high tide watermark of the Rio Grande, and you didn't have to, get into trouble or, pay your customs. You just tied up and went back and forth. So we had to talk with Homeland Security. I said, okay, you have a right to enforce these, and the Department of Interior issued permits, for these companies to do the rafting, but just keep in mind what the original intent was, that it was just a river, we both used it, and we were neighbors. And in a bigger sense, this is how we get to the water treaty and how it was applied, and then we get into the different minutes 317 and 318, is that a neighbor isn't somebody that lives next door or across the river or around the lake up north. A neighbor really is anybody that needs help. And with that in mind, we had, see if I have a slide here. We had the earthquake, there we go, had the earthquake back in April 2010, and Mexico said, okay, we're going to have about 260,000 acre feet that we may not be able to use. Is there a way we can store it in the U.S. and then withdraw it in such a fashion that we don't create a water shortage or drought for the basin states, and that we all can help each other? So Commissioner Connor and the attorneys, Bob Snow and Ms. Harkins and Lori Gray, myself and Tim Ramish of the State Department all sat down. And we started in October, November, and December, just before Christmas. And as you can tell, we lost a lot of hair, except for Commissioner Connor. But we were pulling our hair trying to figure out, how we could, balance the water and Lake Mead, the elevations, and what we were going to do in case there was drought. We didn't get enough rain in 2012 and 2013. And we were looking at the forecast of the water and how this would help. And it was really difficult. We had about 12 different angles going at one time. And Bob will tell you that I think we spent about 2 weeks on exacerbate. And I'm saying, what? Exacerbate, trigger. What could trigger drought? So we came up with kind of an informal working definition that if the elevation in Lake Mead fell below 1,075, what we call 1075, Mexico agreed. I say, okay, we won't take our deliveries, we'll stagger them over a period. We'll be flexible between 2011 and 2013. And we don't want to trigger drought for the upper basin or for the lower basin for that matter. We still get our guaranteed water deliveries of 1.5 million acre feet. And it was this in mind to say, you know what that will do? What that will do is increase the elevation in Lake Mead. That means there's more water to generate electricity and more water available. And then we can decide maybe in 6 months, Mexico can say, okay, we're going to need our water. They give us a 6 months heads up. And that's great. We have water management. This is a big step because it shows neighbors working together. Again, to look at this is basically what Minute 318 does. The best part about it is it increases Lake Mead's elevation and forestalls deliveries. So to make a long story short, this is a great tool. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure, during the question and answer period. And I want to thank you so much for being able to use your marvelous toys. And thank you.
Now, how do you follow an act like that? Yeah? Mario, who is very eloquent, as you can tell, very knowledgeable, and told me when I saw him yesterday, "We know what you're doing." I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "You guys are so good at putting things on the websites that we can go to the website and we can figure out what's going on in the United States." And I thought, well, I wonder if that's good. But I think it is. And Stephen, you know, I'm going to go off in the stretch.
Thank you.
You know? And that's what we've done in this basin. We've stretched. And it's no wonderful. I don't want anybody to take this personally, but it used to be that if water left out of state, it was waste. If it went out of our country to Mexico, it was waste. We don't think that way anymore, and that's good. Mario, actually, these two have pretty much given my presentation, so I'm going to flip through a few slides, but Mario talked about our joint problems. We're growing in population. We have growing cities. For us, it's Denver. Ted, Denver should have been first in this list. Thanks to Ted Kowalski, who put this up for me. Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and Mario mentioned Tijuana, Rosarito, Mexicali. They're all rapidly growing cities. We're looking at non-consumptive needs and values. Those are important. Mario explained the importance of environmental flows for Mexico. I think we're seeing the importance of that here in the United States also. And then, of course, we have drought and climate change. Well, you're sick of that graph, so we'll talk about that. I was so proud of myself until Tanya got up here, because I thought I'm going to have the first map that shows Mexico as part of the basin, but Tanya beat me up on that, so that's the basin. Stephen talked to you about the treaty and the IBWC. See, I'm going to make some time for you, Mark. I want to talk about the process a little bit, because Mario had so much to say, he didn't have a chance to really go into the process, and the process is pretty important. In 2007, there was a joint statement made by U.S. and Mexico that we were going to explore the river binationally. And we talked about conservation opportunities, environmental priorities, opportunities for increased system efficiency, and potential augmentation. And this brought a whole lot of people to the table. Bureau of Reclamation, Canagua, where Mario's from, the IBWC, and SILA, which is the Mexican side of IBWC. We had all the 7 basin states. We had the states in Mexico, Sonora and Baja. We had many water users in both countries at the table. And we had NGOs at the table. And in fact, I have to give credit to the NGOs, because they're the ones who really got this ball rolling. And it's been a good role. So why do the states care what happens at the border? Well, I think the states now have the attitude that we are one big basin. We have the same challenges and difficulties. We made a commitment to each other in 2007 that you heard about earlier. We wanted to pursue augmentation and contemplate shortages, and we wanted to do that with Mexico. So after that announcement, there were meetings and meetings and meetings and more meetings. Well, talk is good, but action is better. Had some rough starts in this process. It didn't help that the two commissioners, the two IBCC commissioners, or IBWC commissioners, who were really getting the ball rolling, passed away in an airplane accident. So that was a bit of a hiccup. Commissioners Jusina and Saman have come in, and they've done a very good job of picking up that momentum. So we had some false starts, we had some misfires, we had some misunderstandings. It's very interesting to walk into a formal meeting, as you heard about the formal meeting we had last week. Our first meeting with these people that you know you share a lot in common with, and everybody all of a sudden gets real stiff. Oh, yeah. Very nice, very good. You know. And so we are all afraid of upsetting each other. And it was interesting. And then we found out, thanks to Mario and many of his compatriots, how different Mexico water law is from United States, Western water law. In Mexico, the federal government controls the water rights. It was hard for the Mexicans to understand why 7 states are sitting at the table here. You know, why isn't the United States good enough? And we had to explain. In the United States, that water belongs to the states and is controlled by the states. And we work in conjunction with the federal government. And so we had to get through some of those. And of course, we had more meetings. Let's see. So we kind of stalled, this, fits and starts, but we finally got rolling. Minute 3:16. Jennifer McCloskey is here. She's head of the Yuma desalting plant. So if you have any questions about minute 3:16, she can tell it to you. But this was what happens if we start operating this plant. We wanted to look at that, and Mexico had some concerns about that, what that would mean to the environment. So what minute 3:16 did is it said, well, the United States, Mexico, and several NGOs each contributed 10,000 acre-feet that was to go to the Cienega de Santa Clara. Nevada Water, CAP, MET, also contributed funds for operations and monitoring of that environment. With that, we were able to look at the Yuma desalting plant, and Jennifer was able to run a year-long pilot study. And we got lots of very good information from that. Well, then we said, okay, on a roll. So you can't do anything without process, of course. So minute 3:17 evolved. Now, Mario talked about the different groups, the water conservation, the new water, the environment, and the system operations. Well, those groups had already been established and were already moving forward. But we formalized this process in minute 3:17. And along with it, there was the core group. And then we had a consultative council, the states, and the higher representatives of Commissioner Connor, his 2 regional directors, Lori Gray Lee, and that other guy, Larry Kobiak, and started attending these meetings. And so we said, these projects are great, but we've got to get a framework around this. Piecemeal, we found, doesn't work. So let's figure out the long goal, and let's figure out how to get there. So we set up this way of communicating with each other. So we talked about the different water projects that Mario talked about, so I'm going to just squick through there. And then we hit the earthquake. Well, the wonderful thing about minute 3:17 is that we had the process in place. And Stephen, I'm going to disagree with you. You said you started talking in October. I think we all started figuring out what was going on April 10th, or whatever that day of the earthquake was. Because we're sitting there going, what are they going to do? They showed us the damage. It was incredible damage. We knew that we had storage space. And so it started a conversation that ended up, fortunately, culminating in minute 3:18. Now, okay, we're on a roll. Signed minute 318 in December. Secretary Salazar went to Mexico. States were very concerned. Is this all Mexico wants? If they get their earthquake water, they're not going to want to talk about the future. Why would they even talk to us anymore? They've got this earthquake water that can be delivered for the next 3 or 5 years. What? Interestingly enough, I found out from Mario yesterday that on the Mexico side, they're going, well, is the United States even interested? What's going on? You know? Are they just going to rest on their laurels here? They've helped their neighbors and that's it? And so it's obvious, I think, that we all want things to move forward. And we want to see that discussion move. But what Mario didn't explain was we only have a small window of opportunity. And that window is from now until the first part of 2012. And why is that? It's because in both countries, campaigns start up for president. And that's when things end up being very difficult to move forward. So we think it's time to move. Now, we were concerned, the states were concerned a little bit that we seem to have 5 months of quiet. Now, Bureau of Reclamation said, we're working with IBWC, we're working with SELA, you know, we're trying to set up a process, we want to move forward. Commissioner Dracena talked to all the states and said, I want commitments, and I want commitments for you to get into this process and to move forward. And he got them. But what happened, what happened through this is we added some components to the structure. And and by the way, the core group to the other 4 groups down here, that should have an arrow there. We just didn't get there. So all of a sudden, as Mario mentioned, we had a hydrology work group and a salinity work group. Then we had something called the leadership group, which was kind of a surprise to a lot of us. I think they call themselves that, but they were the people that were making sure things kind of move forward, I hope. And state got a little uneasy because we were participating, and then when it comes to some real nitty-gritty stuff like hydrology and salinity, now we're observers. And what does that mean? You know, now we have a very good relationship with our friends in the Bureau of Reclamation. We have a very good relationship with IBWC. But to observe and to participate is a little bit different. So I will agree with Pat Terrell, there is nothing too small that we can't moan about on the Colorado River. I do want to back up one step because I'm running out of time here. This talks about the support that we've had for these minutes, and it's very important to note the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They are involved. We keep them informed. Well, we don't. IBWC keeps them informed through the State Department. And so they very clearly know what's going on. So moving forward. We had a meeting last week. We recommitted to getting something done. As I characterized it, it was a very polite meeting. It's time for us to have very substantive discussions and to figure out what our concerns are, what their concerns are, and how we can meet and how we can take care of it. And with people like Mario and Stephen, you can see that we've got a lot of good friends in that area. Two important things to note. My lawyers would kill me if I didn't say this. These are cooperative, voluntary agreements. We are not interested in renegotiating the treaty. We are not interested in renegotiating the compact. The second thing is all of these solutions are able to happen within the framework of those compacts and of that treaty. So Mexico is in the same mindset right now that the United States is. We need to stretch. Thank you.
Okay, so this should be fun. I think I'm guessing there are some questions now. Is our microphone available? Let me get us started as I did with the earlier panel, just so that we can have people starting to think about their questions. One of the things that's really struck me about our discussion over the day today and even last evening and some of the pre-conference panels that were going on was just this sort of spirit of cooperation and getting along. I mean, this is not what historically I think we've thought about in terms of Colorado River negotiations. And this whole notion that we're going to manage the river holistically as sort of one unit, we're going to all work together to do what's best and not worry about borders. I mean, that's a fairly shocking evolution, I guess, to somebody who teaches water law and is caught in some of the old ways about talking of these things. So I'm very encouraged by that, but I'm also struck, we've got this sort of notion of the Colorado River Compact, the treaty. There are some fairly specific constraints, I would say, there. Maybe we can interpret them flexibly, but it feels a little bit like almost a Delaware River Basin Commission style management that people are going to. Maybe it's voluntary. Jennifer's given the appropriate kinds of disclaimers about how far we're willing to go with this, but it does feel like we're managing holistically, or at least we want to go there, and that we're willing to sort of not get caught up in the specifics of the law. And am I reading too much into this, I guess, is my question, or are we really trying to manage this together holistically as one unit? Somebody?
Okay, I'll bite. Yes.
Come
But
on,
I wouldn't
Jennifer.
compare it to the Delaware Water Authority, really. I think that the states are trying very, very hard, as Pat Mulroy and Pat Terrell said this morning. We are adamant that the compact is there and that it should stay. It remains the framework for our discussions, but it is not stagnant. And so I think we're seeing that. We are growing.
Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yes, when you say the word holistically, we understand it, at least on the Mexican side, as everybody's participation, all the stakeholders, and in Mexican terms, it is written in the national water law. We establish who are water stakeholders, who will participate in the decision making. And at least from Mexico's perspective, this is happening with the negotiations. We have the stakeholders inside, we have Baja California, we have Sonora, we have the Federation, we have the users as well participating in the process. So Mexico's perspective is we are doing it holistically. And if you consider as well Pro Natura, the Nature Conservancy, and some of the US NGOs working together, everybody is in the process.
Interesting. I think there's a question in the back.
Thank you very much for all those presentations. I'm Mary Kelly, and I actually live in Texas, but I've been working on Colorado River issues. It'd be nice if we have this level of cooperation on the Rio Bravo when we come to our next drought in that basin. But I wanted to ask Jennifer and Mario and Steve what you see as the key elements of the comprehensive agreement that you're all shooting for.
The comprehensive agreement is down the road. Before we get there, the issue will be salinity, believe it or not. We have water, but if you look at minute 242, 317, and 318, we're concerned about the salinity. As you know, that area that we are in was once a great sea. And, you know, water trickles down, the lower the water, the higher the salinity level. And so it's not just the amount of water that we supply, but it's the quality as well. The other consideration is it's becoming, I think, waste treatment and how we transport our wastewater and how we're using what water we have in developing water sources. So before we get to a comprehensive minute, I said the two nations, and I guess the basin states also to a greater extent, because it depends on the levels of Lake Mead and Lake Powell, and you know how that is. The higher the levels, the lower salinity. Is the the quality of the water, because we're poisoning ourselves. I think Don Mario said it quite carefully, that if we give poor quality, the crops are going to diminish, we're going to have less to eat, the prices will go up, just what we're facing now with the drought that we've had. It was almost 120 days without rain in Texas. And so, yeah, the issue is quality. Hopefully, we're developing, I sense something, this is just something I've observed over the past year, that we're seriously thinking about we're belt tightening right now in the economy of the United States. And I think Mario referred, the poles have shifted, water levels have shifted, the polar caps, maybe water from the ocean is not such a bad idea. Does it cost a lot? Yes, but it's less than too much when you consider that you can take that water and make it available to both nations. We can store more water instead of the deliveries that come down, and we can have higher elevation, which in turn translates into energy and hopefully lower costs in the long run. So yeah, a comprehensive minute is coming. We'll be storing more water. You'll find, I think, in the future that water will be stored more on Mexico as we deliver those sources. And I think just within the last month or so, we've had discussions about Nogales, Arizona, and the waste treatment plant. And I think one of the helpful things that happened is that our traditional U.S. agencies, if you want to call it BEC and EPA, are now thinking maybe it's cheaper to start developing and contributing our funds into pre-treatment and secondary treatment, because the populations are growing greater and a faster rate along the border, particularly in Mexico, and that our current waste treatment capabilities are almost at their limit now. So we have to think down the road. So yes, there will be a comprehensive minute, but you're going to see panoramic planning, so to speak. And they'll be looking at all of the issues, the quality, the amount, different sources, translating that into energy as well.
Yeah, as Stephen says, Mexico's perspective is to have water quality and water quantity in a comprehensive way. And if you split water quantity, it comes to what he says: new water for the system and present water of the system. And you split it once again, you will find that inefficiency, that it is the way that it's been used. And what I mean not only is inefficient in the agriculture, he also said wastewater, treated wastewater should be used and reused as many times as possible, as new water or as present water. And if you see it in terms of water quality, as I said, you can handle water quality in two different ways. You can use technology to improve water quality, or you can use the environment to improve water quality. And Mexico's option, preferable in a comprehensive approach, is to use the environment to improve water quality.
I'd answer that in a little higher level. And I agree with these guys that that's got to be dealt with. But I think the states look at this next agreement as contemplating how to share shortages. And I think you heard Mario say, we also need to talk about sharing surplus. And then how we can effectively use storage in United States reservoirs to help run the river more efficiently. And so that's how I would answer that.
Hi, Debbie Hathaway with SS Papadopoulos. And in hearing the discussion of salinity and conservation, it raises the question as to whether management of transboundary groundwater is part of the dialogue that you expect under the comprehensive agreement that you're working on.
I can answer that. Groundwater, it is not regulated by any treaty yet. So we have been facing problems in the very recent history, especially in Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, because on the Mexican side, we are overdrafting the aquifer, the same aquifer that we're sharing with the U.S., and the U.S. is restricting their pumping on their side. So in the first instance, we decided to make common studies. There's a fund, an appropriation by the Senate to fund the studies for transboundary aquifers. And together we decided which aquifers to start. Of course, Ciudad Juárez and El Paso was the first one, but again, we incorporated some of the aquifers that we share in San Pedro, in the basin of the Colorado, San Pedro, Santa Cruz, as part of the studies. We believe that this next agreement that we are talking about and discussing will not include, and I underline it, will not include for the moment groundwater. But this doesn't mean that we are not interested in the near future to develop an agreement specifically for this situation of transboundary aquifers. Together we work in the UNESCO initiative, and I believe there's a professor at the University of Arizona who is a good friend of mine, Chris Scott, who is also working on that direction, developing the aquifer studies on the U.S. side, on the northwestern part of the U.S., and the Texas A&M is developing the studies on the U.S. side for the eastern part of the border. And on the Mexican side, Mexico Conagua is deciding who is the partner for those universities to develop the studies. This is the first stage. What would be the next stage? To begin discussion how to handle a common aquifer. And I'm sure, I'm optimistic, that we will have the same results and successes that we are having right now with the 7 states.
I have a very specific question about the deal that allowed the restarting of the Yuma desalter. And I'm wondering if something that is terrific from the point of view of international cooperation is resulting in something that's really crazy from the standpoint of energy. It sounds like brackish water, which used to go to the Ciénaga de Santa Clara, is now desalted so that it can be put in the Colorado River. But at the same time, lower salinity water is taken out of the Colorado River, mixed with the waste stream from the desalter to make brackish water, which then goes to the Ciénaga de Santa Clara. So the desalter is really doing nothing that wouldn't have been accomplished by simply letting that brackish water continue to go to the Ciénaga de Santa Clara and let the clean water, to which the NGOs have rights, stay in the Colorado River. I know that's a little confusing, but
That is
Well,
a question for
I
was
would
presented
suggest
was that
that
the
you talk
NGOs
to
are-
Jennifer. She's right here
what was
at the
presented was
break.
that the NGOs
Jennifer
are
McCloskey.
donating water for the Cienega de Santa Clara. Have I got that wrong?
And here's how I would answer that, and of course, I'm at a higher level than the technical stuff, and Jennifer can give you specifics on it, but I saw this pilot run as giving us a lot of information on a lot of different things. And the questions you ask are some of the things that we need to look at. And it was a pilot run, so it's done with now.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. I'm Faith Sternlieb from the Colorado State University at the Colorado Water Institute. And I wanted to ask about something that Mario brought up, which was very interesting and hasn't really been discussed that much thus far. Maybe it will be yet to come, about the water coming from U.S. through the Colorado River Basin to Mexico to water the crops that come right back to the U.S. And also, I guess we've discussed the past day and a half or so about the change in the hydrologic cycle, which is due to climate change, but also due to intensive management in the basin. And so with that and some discussion about water budgets yesterday, I was curious if one of the solutions, if you've explored, I guess, as a solution, the concept of virtual water, trading virtual water between U.S. and Mexico.
I can get that. First, I want to say to you, thank you very much for taking into the table the virtual water concept. The virtual water concept is one thing that Mexico, at least, is considering as to be included in the next national water plan as one of the policies to be implemented in our country. To be honest with you, we have not considered yet the concept to be implemented in this agreement. But it could be. It could be. Why? As I said to you before, the Mexican allocation, it is legally given to the farmers in Mexico. In reality, they don't use the whole allocation. Some of the allocation is being used for water supply. And this will be the future for the water of the Colorado River, that's for sure. What's Mexico's idea? To improve efficiency, to leave water in the U.S., in the U.S. dams. The other part of the water be used in water supply. And since the farmers in Mexico will not use its whole allocation, the idea would be to reduce the overdrafting of Mexican aquifers. In this formula, if we introduce the concept of virtual water, it would change just a little bit. Why? Mexico will not grow, should not grow. We will promote that Mexico will not export those crops that use most water. And we will export those crops that use less water to the U.S. In the recent situation, most of the crops are vegetables that use much of the water. So the formula will change and will help Mexico's improvement of water efficiency. Where should we grow those crops that will go to the U.S. in other parts of Mexico, where we do have much water and we don't care, quote to quote, the amount of water we're using to produce certain product? That's right.
All right, well, I think we're about at our time for a break. Why don't we thank our panel one last time, and we'll take a quick break. Thanks, everybody. That was great. Really good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Really nice.